March 6, 1944, 31,000 ft above the German capital. The morning air cuts sharp and thin. Oberst Klaus Mietusch adjusts his oxygen mask, scanning the crystalline sky through the perspex canopy of his Messed Bf-109. G6, below the sprawling grid of Berlin stretches to the horizon its streets and buildings reduced to miniature precision by altitude. The veteran pilot has led his squadron into combat 294 times. He has claimed 102 Allied aircraft. This morning feels different. Something electric hangs in the stratosphere, a tension that makes his gloved hands tighten involuntarily on the control stick. Then he sees them, silver glints catching the early light, moving in disciplined formations far below the German fighters. American bombers, just as intelligence had warned, B-7 flying fortresses approaching in their characteristic box formations, their aluminum skins reflecting the pale March sun like scattered mirrors across the sky. But something is wrong with this picture. Where are their escorts? Mietusch has learned to expect the stubby, powerful silhouettes of P-47 Thunderbolts, or the twin-boom profiles of P-38 Lightnings accompanying the heavy bombers. Those fighters should have turned back by now, their fuel gauges forcing them homeward long before reaching the German heartland. Yet the sky around the bomber formations shimmers with movement, sleek, unfamiliar shapes that shouldn't exist at this range, this deep into the Reich. The radio crackles in his headset. Achtung Allepilotinn, unknown fighter aircraft accompanying the bomber formations. The voice belongs to his wingman, Unratzer Franz Schall, a 22-year-old from Bavaria whose keen eyes have saved their formation more than once. They're too far from England. This cannot be possible, but it is possible. What Mietusch and his pilots are witnessing above Berlin on this March morning represents the culmination of 2 years of American engineering ambition, British technical expertise, and strategic desperation. The sleek fighter aircraft accompanying those B-7s are North American P-51 Mustangs powered by British-designed Rolls-Royce Merlin engines and equipped with innovative fuel systems that have extended their combat range to an unprecedented 850 m. For the first time in the war, American heavy bombers are arriving over the German capital with fighter escort intact. The implications strike through the Luftwaffe formation like lightning through storm clouds. Every German pilot above Berlin understands what this means. The mathematics are brutal and inescapable. If American fighters can now accompany their bombers to any target in the Reich, the fundamental equation of aerial warfare has shifted permanently. The defensive advantages that have sustained German fighter operations for 4 years, vast distances that forced enemy escorts to turn back, leaving bombers vulnerable to concentrated attack, have evaporated in a single morning. Mietusch's squadron had awakened that dawn, expecting another routine interception mission. The Luftwaffe's tactical doctrine remained unchanged since 1942. Allow the enemy escorts to expend their fuel on the journey eastward, then mass against the unprotected bombers as they approach their targets. German fighter pilots had refined this strategy through hundreds of engagements, learning to time their attacks for maximum effectiveness. When Allied escorts were forced to withdraw, the system had inflicted devastating losses on American daylight bombing missions throughout 1943, losses so severe that some strategic planners in Washington had privately questioned whether daylight precision bombing could continue. Yet now, as Mitt studies the formations below through his gun sight, he realizes those tactical assumptions have become obsolete in a matter of hours. The American fighters maintain their protective screens around the bomber formations with the relaxed confidence of pilots who possess fuel reserves for the long journey home. Their presence over Berlin represents more than technological achievement. It signifies the crumbling of Germany's defensive depth, the collapse of the geographic barriers that have protected the industrial heart of the Reich. The silver P-51s move with predatory grace, their laminar flow wings cutting through the thin air with minimal drag. Each Mustang carries 419 gal of fuel when Fully loaded 184 in internal wing tanks, 85 in a fuselage tank behind the pilot, and 150 in two external drop tanks that can be jettisoned when combat begins. This fuel capacity, combined with the exceptional efficiency of the Rolls-Royce Merlin V1650 engine, provides the Mustang with operational endurance that German intelligence had declared aerodynamically impossible. The men flying those Mustangs represent a new generation of American fighter pilots trained not merely to defend bombers but to actively seek out and destroy Luftwaffe aircraft wherever they might be found. Lieutenant Colonel Don Blakesley's 4th Fighter Group, leading the escort mission this morning, has adopted an aggressive philosophy that would have seemed reckless 2 years earlier. Instead of maintaining close formation with the bombers, Mustang pilots are authorized to break away and pursue German fighters, confident that their fuel reserves will allow them to rejoin the bomber stream hundreds of miles later. Below, in the B-7 formations, Bombardier Technical Sergeant Michael Romano peers through his Norden bomb sight at the German capital approaching. Beneath the aircraft's nose, the 24-year-old from Chicago has flown 19 combat missions over Europe, but this marks his first visit to Berlin. Through his intercom, he can hear pilot Major Robert Jensen discussing fuel consumption figures with the flight engineer, their voices carrying the casual professionalism of men who have learned to treat potential death as a routine occupational hazard. Romano's bomber Memphis Belle carries 12.50 caliber machine guns and 6,000 lb of high explosive ordnance. The aircraft represents American industrial capacity operating at maximum efficiency. Assembly lines in Seattle and Wichita producing 4E bombers faster than German factories can manufacture the fighters to stop them. But what gives Romano confidence this morning is not the bomber's defensive armament or the weight of its bomb load. His reassurance comes from the silver fighters weaving protective patterns around the formation, their presence promising that the long journey home will not be flown alone. The German pilots above the American formations face a tactical dilemma that their training never addressed. Standard Luftwaffe doctrine calls for concentrated attacks against isolated bomber formations using superior numbers and coordinated tactics to overwhelm defensive fire, but the presence of long-range escorts forces a terrible choice. Engage the fighters first and allow bombers to reach their targets unhindered, or attack the bombers and accept devastating losses from the escorting Mustangs. Hauptmann Heinsberg, leading another squadron of Bf-109s from the west, has encountered P-51s before during missions over France and the Low Countries. The 24-year-old ace recognizes the distinctive profile of the American fighter, its bubble canopy providing exceptional visibility, it's a sleek fuselage housing a power plant that outperforms even the latest versions of German fighter engines. Baer has claimed 220 aerial victories in 4 years of combat, but he approaches the Mustangs with grudging respect. In his combat report filed 3 weeks earlier, he noted the P-51's remarkable combination of speed, maneuverability, and endurance. The enemy fighter possesses performance characteristics superior to our latest aircraft in most flight regimes, he wrote. Prolonged engagement is not recommended unless numerical superiority is significant. This morning, numerical superiority belongs to the Americans. Intelligence estimates placed nearly 900 Allied fighters above German airspace, the largest single-day commitment of escort aircraft in the war. The Luftwaffe can muster perhaps 200 serviceable fighters to oppose them, and many of those pilots possess minimal combat experience. The Reich's once formidable fighter force has been steadily depleted through attrition, mechanical failures, and fuel shortages that have reduced training hours to dangerously low levels. The fuel situation represents perhaps the cruelest irony facing the Luftwaffe in March 1944. German aircraft production has actually increased during the first quarter of the year, with factories delivering more than 2,000 fighter aircraft per month, but shortages of aviation gasoline mean That many of these fighters remain grounded, their tanks empty, their pilots unable to accumulate the flight time necessary for combat effectiveness. By contrast, the American pilots approaching Berlin have benefited from extensive training programs that provide more than 300 hours of flight time. Before assignment to combat units, Lieutenant Wolfgang Fischer, flying his third combat mission in a Bf-109 G-14, embodies the Luftwaffe's personnel crisis. The 19-year-old from Hamburg received only 78 hours of flight training before assignment to his squadron, barely 1/4 of the instruction time provided to German pilots earlier in the war. He has never fired his aircraft's weapons in anger, never executed a combat maneuver under enemy fire, never experienced the disorienting violence of aerial combat. As he watches the approaching American formations, Fischer's hands tremble slightly on his controls, not from cold, but from the recognition that his survival depends on skills he has never been allowed to develop. The sound that fills Fischer's cockpit as he opens his throttle represents the audio signature of German industrial decline. His Daimler-Benz DB605A engine, designed for 87-octane fuel, has been forced to operate on synthetic substitutes with inconsistent quality and reduced power output. The engine runs rough, its performance degraded by fuel that would have been considered unacceptable 2 years earlier. By contrast, the Mustangs approaching from the west burn 150-octane aviation gasoline, a fuel so superior that it allows their Merlin engines to produce 1,695 horsepower at war emergency power. Technical Sergeant Romano, adjusting his bomb sight for the final approach to target, notices something that would have seemed impossible during missions flown in 1943, German fighters attacking individually or in pairs rather than the masked formations that once swept through bomber streams like scythes through wheat. The change reflects the Luftwaffe's organizational collapse, its inability to coordinate large-scale interceptions due to communication failures, fuel shortages, and the simple absence of experienced pilots capable of leading complex tactical maneuvers. The bombs begin falling at 11:27 hours Central European Time. Romano's crosshairs center on a factory complex in the Tempelhof district, and he releases 6,000 lb of high explosive with the mechanical precision of a man performing routine work. Across the bomber stream, 238 other bombarders execute similar actions, dropping more than 1,400 tons of ordnance on aircraft, factories, ball bearing plants, and transportation infrastructure. The explosions bloom like deadly flowers across the German capital, each detonation representing not merely physical destruction but the systematic dismantling of the Reich's capacity to continue the war. Above the bombing formations, the aerial battle develops with vicious intensity. Mietusch leads his squadron into a head-on attack against a formation of B-17s, his 420mm cannons and single 30 gun firing in staccato bursts that send tracer rounds streaming past the American bombers. But before he can press his attack to decisive range, silver shapes drop from above like hunting hawks. Lieutenant Robert Johnson, flying a P-51B named Ridgerunner, 3 rolls inverted and dives onto Mietusch's Mesmet, his 650 caliber machine guns chattering in unison. The engagement lasts 47 seconds. Johnson's initial burst strikes Mietusch's left wing, tearing away fabric and puncturing the fuel tank. The German ace attempts to break away in a steep climbing turn, using his aircraft's superior climb rate to escape the Mustang's guns, but Johnson anticipates the maneuver, leading his target with the practiced skill of a pilot who has flown 127 combat missions. His second burst strikes the Bf-109's engine compartment, and Mietusch's fighter begins trailing thick black smoke. Oberst Klaus Mietusch, one of Germany's most experienced fighter pilots, dies 31,000 ft above his own capital city. His aircraft impacts the Earth 17 minutes later in a suburb northwest of Berlin, adding his name to a casualty list that has been growing exponentially since the Mustangs began. Appearing over German airspace, the man who had survived 294 combat missions becomes another statistic in what historians would later recognize as the final phase of the war for control of Europe's skies, the battle above Berlin continues for another hour, but its outcome has been determined by fundamental imbalances in resources, training, and technology. German pilots, many flying their first or second combat missions, engage American airmen who have benefited from extensive preparation and superior equipment. The results prove predictably one-sided by the time the last American formations disappear westward toward England. The Luftwaffe has lost 69 aircraft and 47 pilots. American losses total 11 bombers and 6 fighters, but statistics alone cannot capture the psychological impact of March 6, 1944, for German military leaders. The appearance of American fighters over Berlin represents a strategic catastrophe that transcends mere tactical defeat. The Reich's defensive perimeter has been penetrated at its most sensitive point, demonstrating American capability to project military power anywhere within German-occupied Europe. The implications extend far beyond aviation. If American fighters can escort bombers to Berlin and return, then no target within the Reich remains beyond Allied reach. Reichsmarshal Hermann Göring, nominal commander of the Luftwaffe, reportedly utters words that would be remembered long after the war's end. "When I saw Mustangs over Berlin, I knew the jig was up." The comment, whether accurately quoted or not, reflects a recognition that fundamental assumptions about Germany's defensive capabilities have been shattered by American technological achievement and industrial capacity. The silver fighters that returned to England that evening carry more than empty ammunition boxes and depleted fuel tanks. They transport evidence of a transformed strategic balance, proof that American forces have achieved the capability to strike German targets at will. The long-range escort mission flown on March 6 represents the culmination of 2 years of doctrinal evolution, technical development, and tactical refinement. What began as a desperate attempt to make daylight bombing viable has evolved into a systematic campaign to achieve air superiority over the European continent. Lieutenant Johnson, landing at his base in eastern England as afternoon shadows lengthen across the countryside, shuts down his Merlin engine and sits quietly in his cockpit for several minutes. The 23-year-old from Nebraska has just flown 1,750 m in 7 hours and 23 minutes, a mission that would have been impossible with any other fighter aircraft in the world. His victory over Mietusch brings his personal score to 16 aerial victories, but numbers fail to capture the significance of what has been accomplished. The ground crew chief who helps Johnson from his aircraft notices something that has become routine during recent weeks. The pilot shows no signs of the exhaustion that once characterized long-range missions. The P-51's spacious cockpit, efficient heating system, and smooth-running engine have eliminated much of the physical stress associated with extended combat flights. Johnson's alertness after 7 hours in the air contrasts sharply with the condition of German pilots who struggle to maintain combat effectiveness after 90 minutes of flight in cramped, poorly heated cockpits. Back in Germany, the survivors of Mietusch's squadron land at bases that epitomize the Reich's declining resources. Fuel trucks arrive half empty, spare parts exist in critically short supply, and replacement pilots possess training levels that would have been considered inadequate for combat 2 years earlier. The organizational structure that once made the Luftwaffe the world's most effective air force has been systematically degraded by the demands of total war and the attrition imposed by superior Allied production. UNTAP officer Klaus Mietusch's former wingman fills out a combat report that reflects the new reality facing German fighter pilots. Enemy escort fighters appeared over target area in unprecedented numbers. He writes, "Aircraft performance superior to our equipment in speed, range, and Firepower, coordinated defense impossible due to fuel limitations and communication failures. Recommend. Immediate tactical revision to address change conditions, but tactical revision cannot address strategic imbalances rooted in industrial capacity and resource allocation. German aircraft factories, despite heroic efforts to increase production, cannot match the output of American assembly lines that operate with unlimited access to raw materials, fuel, and skilled labor. The Mustangs that appeared over Berlin represent the products of an economy operating at maximum efficiency, supported by resources drawn from an entire continent, and unhindered by bombing or invasion. The young German pilots who survived the March 6 engagement returned to barracks where conversations increasingly focus on survival rather than victory. Letters home, censored but revealing, speak of fuel shortages that prevent adequate training, mechanical problems that cannot be properly addressed, and replacement pilots who lack the skills necessary for combat effectiveness. The psychological impact of these conditions compounds the material disadvantages facing the Luftwaffe, creating a downward spiral of declining morale and reduced combat performance. By contrast, American pilots returned to bases in England where hot meals, adequate quarters, and efficient maintenance support reinforce their confidence in ultimate victory. The P-51 squadrons that escorted bombers to Berlin will fly similar missions 3 days later, then again the following week, establishing a routine of sustained operations that German forces cannot match. The Americans possess not merely superior equipment, but the logistical infrastructure necessary to maintain high operational tempos indefinitely. The Mustang that Johnson flew to Berlin will undergo routine maintenance, refueling, and rearming before its next mission. Ground crews trained in American technical schools will replace worn components with parts shipped from factories in Detroit, Cleveland, and Los Angeles. The aircraft will receive 150 octane fuel refined from petroleum pumped in Texas and Oklahoma, then transported across the Atlantic by tankers protected by naval escorts. This vast logistical network, invisible to the pilots who benefit from its efficiency, represents American industrial mobilization operating at unprecedented scale. German pilots, by comparison, must husband their resources with the care of men who understand that shortages are becoming critical. Synthetic fuel production never adequate to meet demand has been further reduced by Allied bombing of chemical plants and transportation networks. The petroleum that reaches German airfields often contains impurities that reduce engine performance and increase maintenance requirements. Spare parts exist in chronically short supply, forcing mechanics to cannibalize damaged aircraft to keep operational machines flying. The broader implications of March 6 extend beyond aviation to encompass Germany's entire strategic position. The successful escort mission demonstrates Allied capability to project military power deep into occupied Europe, foreshadowing the amphibious invasions that will commence 3 months later. German military planners studying intelligence reports of the Berlin raid recognized that their defensive calculations must be fundamentally revised to account for American long-range fighter capability. Adolf Hitler, receiving briefings on the day's losses, reportedly demands explanations for the Luftwaffe's failure to prevent American bombers from reaching the capital, but explanations cannot alter the mathematical realities that govern aerial warfare. The Reich simply lacks the resources, fuel, pilots, aircraft, and industrial capacity necessary to contest American air superiority over German airspace. The gap between Allied capabilities and German resources will continue widening as 1944 progresses, creating conditions that make Luftwaffe defeat inevitable. Technical Sergeant Romano, reviewing target photographs taken during the Berlin raid, observes bomb craters scattered across aircraft factories and transportation facilities. The damage appears substantial, but Romano understands that physical destruction represents only one dimension of strategic bombing's impact. The psychological effect of unescorted American formations penetrating German airspace may prove more significant than the tonnage of explosive ordnance delivered to target German civilians. Witnessing Allied bombers escorted by fighters over their capital city face the undeniable evidence that their government's promises of impregnable defenses have proven hollow. The silver Mustangs that accompany American bombers serve as visible symbols of German vulnerability. Tangible proof that the Reich's military forces cannot protect its population from attack. This recognition undermines civilian morale and erodes confidence in ultimate victory. The fuel that powers the Mustangs over Berlin has become a weapon more potent than high explosive or incendiary bombs, American petroleum production exceeding 5 million barrels per day provides the foundation for sustained air operations that German synthetic fuel plants cannot match. The gasoline refined in Texas refineries and transported to English airfields represents strategic power projected across thousands of miles, demonstrating industrial capacity that dwarfs anything available to the Axis powers. By April 1944, the pattern established over Berlin has become routine. American heavy bombers escorted by P-51 Mustangs range freely across German airspace, striking targets that were previously considered beyond Allied reach. The Luftwaffe's defensive response grows increasingly desperate as fuel shortages, pilot losses, and mechanical failures reduce operational capability to critical levels. Lieutenant Fischer, the young pilot who witnessed Mietusch's death over Berlin, survives only 11 more days of combat operations. His Bf-109, starved of adequate fuel for proper maintenance, suffers engine failure during a scramble mission and crashes. Short of his home airfield, Pfizer becomes another casualty in a campaign that has evolved from tactical engagement to strategic annihilation, a war of attrition that Germany cannot sustain against Allied industrial supremacy. The P-51 Mustang has become more than an aircraft. It has evolved into a symbol of American technological achievement and industrial mobilization. The silver fighters that appear daily over German skies represent the marriage of British aerodynamic expertise with American manufacturing capability, creating a weapons system that exceeds the performance of any comparable aircraft in the world. But beyond technical specifications, the Mustang embodies the strategic confidence of a nation that has learned to project military power globally. The fuel tanks that give the P-51 its unprecedented range contain more than aviation gasoline. They hold the concentrated essence of American abundance, the liquid representation of petroleum reserves that seem limitless compared to Germany's synthetic substitutes. Every gallon burned over German territory demonstrates the vast disparity in resources available to the opposing forces, a mathematical inequality that predetermines the war's ultimate outcome. German ace pilots, the survivors who continue flying against increasingly hopeless odds, develop a grudging respect for the American fighters that have made their own aircraft obsolete. The Mustang's combination of speed, range, firepower, and maneuverability represents aeronautical achievement that German designers, constrained by resource shortages and production limitations, cannot duplicate. The silver fighters have become the instruments of Luftwaffe destruction, systematically eliminating Germany's most experienced pilots and finest aircraft. Major Hinz Baer, one of the few German aces to survive encounters with P-51s throughout 1944, later described the Mustang as the end of everything we had known about fighter combat. His assessment reflects not merely technical appreciation but recognition that the aircraft represents transformed strategic realities. The days when German fighters could dominate European skies through superior training and tactics have ended, replaced by Allied numerical and technological superiority that grows stronger with each passing month. The young American pilots who fly those Mustangs carry within their cockpits the accumulated industrial might of a continent. Their aircraft consume fuel Refined from Texas crude oil, burn ammunition manufactured in Connecticut factories, and operate engines built with steel forged in Pennsylvania mills. This vast productive capacity mobilized for total war creates military capabilities that no single European nation can match. The P-51 serves as the delivery system for American industrial supremacy, projecting power across oceans and continents with unprecedented effectiveness. As spring turns to summer in 1944, the pattern established over Berlin extends across the entirety of German-occupied Europe. Mustang escorted bombing formations range from Norway to Romania, from France to Poland, striking targets that contribute to the Reich's war-making capacity. The Silver fighters have made German airspace indefensible, creating conditions that allow Allied ground forces to prepare for invasion with minimal interference from Luftwaffe aircraft. The transformation is complete by June 6 when Allied forces storm the beaches of Normandy under skies dominated by American and British aircraft. German fighter response proves negligible, a mere shadow of the formidable force that once contested every mile of European airspace. The Luftwaffe's defeat, begun over Berlin in March and accelerated by months of attrition, ensures that the invasion proceeds without significant air opposition. The P-51 Mustang has fulfilled its designer's most ambitious dreams while exceeding their wildest expectations. Created initially as a ground attack aircraft for British requirements, the Mustang evolved into the instrument of German air power's destruction. Its range enabled strategic bombing to continue. Its performance dominated enemy fighters, and its mere presence over German territory demonstrated Allied capability to strike any target within the Reich. But perhaps the Mustang's greatest achievement lies in what it represents rather than what it accomplishes through direct action. The Silver fighters that appeared over Berlin on March 6, 1944, embody the industrial democracy's capacity to translate productive capability into military power. They demonstrate that free societies, when properly mobilized, can outproduce and outfight totalitarian regimes that rely on coercion and ideology rather than voluntary cooperation and technological innovation. The fuel that powers the final Mustang missions over Germany in April 1945 burns with the concentrated essence of American abundance. Each gallon consumed represents petroleum pumped from wells that seem inexhaustible, refined in plants that operate continuously and transported by networks that span continents. This liquid wealth transformed into mechanical energy and projected across thousands of miles delivers the ultimate verdict in the struggle between democracy and dictatorship. When German resistance finally collapses, the P-51 Mustang stands as one of the instruments that made victory possible. Its silver wings have carried American power deep into the heart of the Reich, demonstrating that industrial capacity, properly directed, can overcome even the most fanatical resistance. The aircraft that German pilots called the end of everything has indeed ended something, the illusion that totalitarian efficiency could triumph over democratic abundance. In the quiet that follows surrender, maintenance crews service their Mustangs with the methodical care of men who understand that their aircraft have participated in historic transformation. The Silver fighters rest on English airfields, their fuel tanks empty, but their mission complete. They have escorted democracy to victory, carried freedom across hostile skies, and delivered the ultimate judgment on those who believed that might could permanently triumph over right. The echo of Merlin engines fades into memory, but their legacy endures. The P-51 Mustang proved that American industrial democracy, when fully mobilized, possesses the capacity to project power globally and sustain operations indefinitely. It demonstrated that abundance, properly organized, defeats scarcity, regardless of the desperation that scarcity inspires. Most fundamentally, it showed that free peoples fighting for principles they genuinely believe will ultimately prevail over those who rely on force alone to achieve their